Hi, I'm Ashton. My iPad is charging like really slowly right now. If you didn't know, that's what I used to film. So I'm just gonna leave it on the charger and not use a mic in this video. It's fine. Today I'm gonna be talking about something that I've seen in the news a lot and I've seen floating around Twitter, and I've seen some super duper mixed opinions about it, which is totally understandable. And you'll probably get why there's mixed opinions once I get into what it is. Before I get into this, I also wanted to mention that after my video rant thing on YouTube being a piece of shit towards LGBT people, more and more people have been telling me that like my videos aren't showing up for them, whether in the subscription box or in the like notifications if they have them turned on, which is kind of annoying. Like, I'm not a person that cares about views, but I'm a person that cares about if people want to see my shit, that they see my shit. So if that has been happening to you, I'm really sorry. I don't know if I can do anything to help, because YouTube is really not good at communication, and I don't know any way to, like, fix this at all, but I just wanted to make you aware so that you do know, like, I have been putting out videos if you haven't been seeing them. It's not my fault. I'm really sorry. So, around a week ago, a ton of articles started popping up about brain science and the trans people. And as a trans people, that is a pretty sciencey person, I have a lot of mixed feelings, and I'm just gonna kind of rant about them, but I want to give you a background first. So all the headlines are very like, new study finds that transgender people's brains match the gender that they identify with. That's basically so titles like that generally have like good connotations, right? Like, oh yay, there's more science surrounding trans people. And okay, while you originally might think it's good, if you look more into the actual science, it's like, that's not the conclusion that happened with these experiments. Like, these headlines are pretty fucking misleading. So first, let's talk about, like, brain science in general. Science is like a process where things are questioned over and over. In the general practice of science, when a conclusion is made from research, that conclusion has to be retested and re-examined and done experiments on and everything before it's considered a actual theory. Things are questioned all the time. That's what science is. That's why science exists. But we're not going to go all philosophy on this. What I'm trying to get at is that one study cannot give such a, like, factual headline that trans people's brains are the brains of the gender they identify with, for multiple reasons, not just because, like, that's just not how science works. If you look into many other neuroscience studies, while male brains and female brains are, yes, centered in different spots when it comes to different chemicals and the size of different parts of them, they aren't scientifically or statistically different in a significant way. There's so much overlap in the chemicals and the sizes of different parts of the brain that there's just no way to distinguish a male brain from a female brain. This has been known since like 2010. There's an article from 2013 like talking about how there's literally no difference in male and female brains. Because yes, we could look at someone's brain like post-mortem or whatever and say this is likely a female brain. It's still not going to be accurate because there's so many overlaps in the science that that's just not how brains work. That's just not how science works. Riley J. Dennis did an incredible video on this a while back that I'm going to link to that goes way more in depth, shows studies. Like, it's just a really good video. You should definitely go watch it. Anyways, let's take that as a base of this whole video, right? This is the background. You cannot look at a brain and determine someone's gender or biological sex from that person's brain. I know I just talked about science, but this has also been statistically disproven. Sean David, who is a Stanford professor, did like a meta-analysis of, I think, 180 research papers, and a meta-analysis is like a compilation of data that's already been collected. So he did research on this research, which is like a really good idea in science and in statistics. I just finished an AP statistics course, by the way, so I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so out of 180 papers that studied the difference between male and female brains, they found that the number of reported differences did not increase as the sample size increased, which in basic statistics shows that there isn't a correlation. Like, when your sample size increases, when your number of people included increases, there should be a clearer distinction between two categories if you're trying to separate them. But there wasn't. It kept showing that there's huge variation and huge overlap, even with larger sample sizes. So, like, okay, anyways, I talked enough about this. there's no difference. And if there is, it's unmeasurable, unreasonable to measure, and very, very overlapping. Another research group with 1,400 participants also concluded that brains are not like distinctly male or distinctly female. They're more like a mosaic of features that seem distinctly male or seem distinctly female. So like, have I provided enough evidence yet? Like, there's no male and female brain. So that's the basis of what I'm going to get into, that the difference between male and female brains, while it's there, it's not something that we can really quantify or determine based on a brain what somebody's sex is. Anyways, go watch that video if you want to get into the science of it. I'm just giving you like the basic overview without any numbers, so you can just like kind of process it. It's all good. So anyways, what these articles are claiming that this study found out, a trans person's brain aligns with brains that typically align with their gender identity. So from what I've already stated, you can already see the problem with this. Like, the brain of anybody cannot be gender. That's not how brains work. That's not how science works. So applying this thing that's already kind of been disproven to trans people is already pretty silly. But what gets even more ridiculous is the way that this study worked was that they did brain scans, right, of a bunch of trans people, and they seemed to align with the gender that they identified with, which, like, should be pretty obvious. Like, trans people are just, like, people. I'm going to get into soon why this study in itself is problematic and unnecessary and dehumanizing, but, like, I guess my point at first is, like, this study just didn't need to happen because we already know that there's no discernible difference between male and female brains, so trying to find a reason for someone being transgender in their brain when we already know that there's no difference between male and female brains is pretty dumb. Brains are non-binary. You can't change my mind. Aside from, like, the fact that all of this is just shitty science, like, this isn't the way you science, this isn't the way you should portray a study in a headline, I think that the fact that these studies were done, even, is kind of a disservice to the trans community. First of all, I'm of, like, the strong belief that when somebody says they're trans, you should just believe them. You shouldn't have to interrogate them on dysphoria. You shouldn't have to, like, check their medical records to make sure that they're on hormones. You shouldn't have to force them into surgery. And you shouldn't have to scan their brain. I feel like you should just trust people on what their identities are. You're not going to be able to tell, like, if someone is truly trans by just looking at them or just by looking at their brain. It's not feasible. Why don't we just listen to people when they say they're trans? I feel like that would be a far better solution. So essentially this study, like, uses brain scans to compare trans people's brains against the cisgender binary standard. Does that not sound toxic to you? Because I feel like, to me, that's just an immediate, like, ew. Why would we do that? Why can't we just take people's word for who they are, listen to people when they say what pronouns they want to use, what name they want to go by, what surgeries or what hormones they want to go on? Like, why can't we just listen to people? This is unnecessary. There are so many other, like, research studies that we could be doing about trans people or about LGBT people. There are so many things that we could be researching and looking into, but no, we decide to compare trans people's brains to cis people's brains because there must be some explanation to the transgenders. Another problem I have with this is that it draws so many parallels for me with gay people. When gay rights were a far bigger issue than they are now, like when it was far less accepted than today, it was like a huge thing about finding the gay gene and finding what makes people gay. And now, obviously, we know that, like, people are gay. That's just how it is. Like, some people are gay. Some people are trans. So to me, this, like, is just a giant recall to the gay gene and finding the gay gene. Now it's like finding the trans brain. Like, we don't need to find something biologically that proves who we are. Like, if we know who we are, let us be who we are. We don't need to scan our brains to figure it out. So anyways, the results of this study were seen as like a victory for trans kids because the thought was, if we can scan a trans person's brain, then we know they're trans earlier and it's great and it's lovely. But there's so many problems with this. Like, first of all, are you going to scan every child's brain? Because that's the only way to figure out, like, who's trans and who's not trans, apparently, according to this dude, which is not true. Also, it's totally, absolutely possible that someone could come up as not trans in a brain scan, but they end up being trans because, as I said earlier, brains are a mosaic. They're not binary male and female. That's not how it works. And on the other end of the spectrum, you could scan a kid's brain and be like, it's a transgender, and then they're like, but I'm not. And then what would you do? Like, would you force them into transition? Like, that's just so inhumane, and there's no reason for this. Like, why does this study exist? Why did you do this, cis people? Another thing I wanted to point out is that I don't know that any trans people were involved in this study other than the subjects. Like, I don't think that any trans people were involved in conducting this research or analyzing this research, which kind of puts me off. If you're going to do research on trans people, you should include trans people in your experiment design. You just should. I feel like what this research really does is put trans people's like livelihoods in the hands of a brain scan. It can't be that simple. There's no way it is simplified down to a brain scan. There are so many things that play into a person's gender and their interpretation of gender and their interpretation of the gender binary and whether it exists or not, that we can't simply break it down to a brain scan. You can't do that. I also, of course, wanted to point out that all of this is so binary, even in this study that I'm talking about with, comparing trans brains to cis brains. It's just binary trans people. Nowhere did they mention non-binary people, which, like, are a subset of the trans community in many cases. And even so, if anything, wouldn't this study prove that everybody's non-binary? Like, if you think your brain can determine your gender, then we already know from previous research that there is no gender, like, physically presenting itself in the brain. Sex does not affect your brain, as I've stated from all of the previous research. So, every brain is non-binary. I feel like instead of doing this pointless and dehumanizing research on the brains of trans people, I feel like there are so many better things we could be doing. We could be raising awareness about trans people. We could be educating younger people on non-binary topics. We could be talking about discrimination in the workplace or in the school place or at home, or we could be doing more research on homeless LGBT people. We could be doing more research on intersectionalities. We could be doing, like, case studies on, like, all sorts of things. But no, you gotta scan some brains and attempt to determine people's gender when it's already been shown so many times. That's not how it works. It's also important to note that the fight for trans equality isn't based in science, and if it is, it's a very, like, small science base. Like, I know science does support that trans people exist, because we do, but, like, fuck that. We should be given rights because we're humans, not because science supports us. Helping trans people be more visible and educating people about trans people is what's going to dissolve bigotry. It's not going to be studies that don't actually have a basis in scientific reality or even statistical reality. Anyways, I guess that kind of sums it up. This just seems super gatekeepy, super unnecessary. It calls back so many, like, homophobic research things that were done in the past. It's unnecessary. I don't understand why it was done and why it was publicized the way that it was. I'm sure there are, like, some articles on probably sites like Them and Everyday Feminism that do talk about this in a far more eloquent way than I ever could. But also, you guys often say that, like, I present my points well, which, like, I would like to say I most of the time probably do not. You should probably go read, like, some structured articles or watch a Riley J. Dennis video, because I am nowhere near the level of, like, structured, very well organized points that those types of things are. But anyways, you can probably tell that I'm pretty stressed about this. I think it's just dehumanizing and unnecessary for all the reasons that I've already talked about. We could be doing more studies on, like, hormone replacement therapy. We could be looking into better phalloplasty options. We could be looking into, like, more breastfeeding for trans women, because that's a thing that's, like, recently been in the news and I think is really cool. We could be looking into trans men and pregnancy. We could be looking into so many things and doing research on so many things that it just genuinely frustrates me that money's being put into stuff like this that in the end really only harms the trans community. Anyways, my hair's been in my face this whole time. I hope that you learned something, and I hope that my whole scientific and statistical stuff didn't throw you off of this. I'm sorry. I hope you have a lovely and gender-confirming rest of your day, and I will talk to you later, maybe.